Welcome to this Extender workflow training video. My name is Natalie, and today we will go through a detailed setup of Extender workflow. We'll have a brief look at what Extender workflow is and what the benefits are. We'll review some licensing and module considerations. And then we will configure a workflow from scratch to approve a new GL account, looking at workflow templates, their steps, actions, values, and parameters, how to attach them to a Sage 300 view, and how to configure the screen icons. We will also look at how we use the workflow console to progress the workflow, screen icons to progress and view workflow history, as well as inquiries and reports. With Extender becoming a platform of choice to tailor Sage 300, we've had many requests for custom scripts to design workflow. Many of those have constant components, which we have incorporated into the workflow functionality of Extender. This will allow business partners and users to have more visibility on the custom processes and key process flow decision points. It should make it easier to maintain and change as the business requirements change. Workflow adds to the existing Extender benefits, making customizations easier to maintain when automating transaction processing, standardizing processes, and basically molding Sage 300 to fit your business requirements. Extender workflow is not a new module, it is a range of new functionality that is available in all editions of Sage 3 of Extender. Configurator includes standard actions that can be arranged into a tailored workflow, and it's the focus of this training. With Customizer and Developer editions of Extender, you can develop your own custom actions using Python scripts. Workflow operates at the view level, and workflow can be attached to any Sage 300 master file view, core modules, as well as third-party modules developed in the SDK. Header transaction views or batch views. Workflow can be started when Sage 300 records are inserted or updated, as well as started manually through icons on the screens. And workflow functionality can also be used in Extender scripts started from Process Scheduler, and that it will be covered in a separate videos. Workflows are made up of steps, and each step is a collection of actions. Values and parameters are used in the workflow to tailor the workflow and to record details in the workflow history. In practice, users of the workflow would use the workflow console to manage the approval requests and tasks, as well as icons on Sage 300 screens. So now we will configure a step-by-step workflow on inserting a new GL account. We will start off with a Sage 300 sample company where Extender and Information Manager have been installed and activated. There are other videos that show you how to use some detailed workflow examples to put customer on hold and manage the taking off hold process, as well as AP batch approval. There is also one on how to ensure a batch is approved before create EFT file on that batch can be run. In the example today, we're looking at a workflow started when a new GL account is inserted. So the process is pretty simple. A user inserts a new GL account in Sage 300. This workflow is going to be attached to the GL AMF view or GL001. So let's now dive into Sage 300. In this example, Extender and Information Manager have been activated, and I've assigned the Extender workflow setup to the admin user. So in the first scenario, we're going to first create our workflow template. A workflow template is made up of steps, actions, progress to steps, and values. So I'm going to create a new workflow template. It's going to be called GL New Account Workflow. I'm going to put in a description. It applies when a new GL account is inserted. I'm making it active, even though it only becomes really active when I attach it to a Sage 300 view, which we'll look at very shortly. It's not going to start manually, as in a user won't click an icon to start the workflow. The workflow will start whenever a GL account is inserted. I'm going to set this to no while we are testing, because we will then see the workflow records updating in the console as we go. So let's just first add this workflow. And we're now going to create our first step. First step is that the account is actually created. It's going to be an entry step, meaning that's the step that's going to be called when the workflow starts. Just going to make this a little bit bigger. You can adjust the width of the columns, and you can also adjust here how the screen is split between the 4 sections, depending on the workflow you're setting up. Now, this step is going to be made up of different actions. The first one I'm going to use is set drill down. Because in this particular example, I want to be able to drill down to the GL account screen from the workflow screens. For a set drill down, I need to set up the field and the value. So I'm going to drill down to a GL account, and the value that I'm passing is the account number. Now, these field names are available if you look at Extender Inquiry View Info. Then once I've set up the drill down, I want to go to the next action. So in this case, whether this action is successful or not, I'm going to go to the same action number 10 and enter a comment there. So I'm going to action 10, and action 10 is going to set the status. And the status is a status for the workflow, for that workflow record. So I'm going to call it new account. And the status is for the workflow console and the workflow history. I'm going to step 20, and I'm going to set the description. So I can type the action name if I know it, as well as use the finder. I can also use the F9 zoom or click on this hyperlink here to open the zoom screen to enter my actions. So the description is a free text field, and again it's used on the console and in the workflow history. In the description, I can use fields from the Sage 300 view that the workflow is attached to. So I can say account ID and the account description. And when it's done, I'm going to go to the next step, and then I can add a new actions from here. So it's going to be 30. And in this example, these 3 things are going to complete the first instance of the workflow that I have. So I'm going to save this record, and I have now created my first simple workflow template. What I'm going to do is then attach it to the Sage 300 view. So if you have used the Extender Configurator or Extender Customizer for that matter, you probably have attached events or scripts to Sage 300 views. So here I can create a new one. If I click on this icon, it will load all the views that are currently active in my Sage 300 database in this example. And now I can search by view name or view description. And I want to use GL accounts, GL0001, GLAMF. You can see we've got a new tab called Workflow. I'm going to attach that in this example to the insert. So whenever a new GL account is inserted. I'm going to select a workflow, and I'm going to select an entry step. So this is going to tell Sage 300 View that whenever a record is inserted, start that workflow on that step. So I'm going to add this, and now I can do my first test. Go to the GL account, and I'm going to add another petty cache for the Sydney office. When I click add, the record has been added, and if I go to my workflow console, so the workflow hasn't been assigned to me because I haven't assigned the workflow to any record in that initial version of the template, so I need to view all workflows to see what actually happened. So let's make this a little bit bigger, expand the columns a bit, and you can see the workflow has been started by admin at that particular time. I've got my template ID here. I've got the view, the record key, so that's the account number. My description has been set as per my workflow template, and the status has been set to new account. The step name is blank, and that indicates that the workflow is actually completed. If I double click on the template ID, it will open my workflow template, so we can now check and see that these 3 actions have been configured correctly. So here, if I look at drill down, I can see that from here I can drill down to the GL account history inquiry or to the GL account. And when I use that, it's going to open the screen. Okay, so we've created our first workflow, which basically is like an advanced version of the logging. In our next example, we're going to build on the initial workflow we've created and add some configuration to alert users and add color to the console and send emails. We're also going to look at adding icons to the Sage 300 screen to view the workflow history. So to use Workflow Extender workflow to help with collaboration between users, the first thing we need to do is configure Extender with the email setup in Extender options. We enter our SMTP details, send a test email, and when the email sent message comes in, we check that we've actually received the email and save the Extender options. Next thing we're going to do is create a new email message template. So we give it a name, a description, typing a subject. In this example, the subject and the body are going to be the same, except here I'm going to, I want to put the user who's actually inserted the record. And to know what variables I can use in my email templates, I can use the F1 help. Opens my message template screen, and here I've got access to all the template variables that I can use, and that includes general time and date and system variables that I can use, and also workflow specific variables that I can use. In this example, the one I'm interested in is user for the current user, so I'm going to copy and paste that in here. Add my workflow template, close the screen, and I'm now ready to use that in my actions. I'm also going to create some workflow user groups. A workflow user group is a group of Sage 300 users that have specific security rights that can do what I want them to do in the workflow. So here I'm creating one called Manager, and I'm inserting a row for each user that is part of that manager group. So if I configure the workflow to use this user group, if Anne isn't a manager anymore, I can remove her from that manager group and put in Steve instead. And I'm also going to add a new workflow color. And to do that, I insert a new row on this screen and choose the color that I want. So now that we've seen that, we're ready to use those actions in the workflow template. Open my workflow template and I can insert some new actions. I like to work in the F9 zoom, so click on here and add a new action. So I'm going to make it action number 35, and the first one I'm going to do is assign a color. So on my workflow console, the row is now going to be colored according to this color name, which you may remember is red for urgent. Whether it is successful or not, I'm still going to go to the next step. And the next step is going to be to assign a user or a user group. And I'm going to use my manager user group. Next, I'm going to send an email. So I'm going to put in my template name. The two can be a plain email address, or it can be a user in Sage 300. We'll use the default email set up for that user in Sage 300 admin services. Or if you choose a user group, all users in that workflow user group will receive the email notification. So in this case, I'm going to use the manager user group. And I'm also going to CC the user who's started the workflow. And I'm going to copy myself as well. If I click on this little help here, I have a summary of the values that I can use in my action parameters or in my templates. So in this case here, I can see that ST user is the user who started the workflow instance. So I can put that in here. And then once I've sent that email, I want to go to complete the workflow, to my complete actions. At the moment, I'm going to do the same thing whether this action is successful or not. We will look at how to control the flow of information depending on true false a bit later. And now in the grid view, it's a good spot to check the actions numbers and the true and false. So I can see that 10 goes to 20, 20 goes to 30, 30 goes to 40. Oops, 40 is a complete action. I need to tell the workflow that after setting the description for the console, I want to go to action 35, which is assign the color. And I'm going to save this. I can click renumber and it will reset all the action numbers and the true and false actions to jumping by 10 so that I can insert numbers in between. So let's save this and let's now test our workflow. I'm going to go to the GL account screen. I'm going to add another petty cache account for the Vancouver office. So I can look at my workflow console. I can see that now I've got a red row. Make this a little bit bigger. The workflow is assigned to manager. And the final thing I've done in my workflow, double click on this to check the actions. I had sent an email, and if I look at my email, I can see that an email was sent to Susan Promer, which is Anne's email address, one of the manager users, and the other emails have been sent as well. So on the console, I can filter by different fields. So in this case, I can filter, for example, highlight the record key. I can filter on all the workflows that have happened to record 0100 or Control F, and I can clear the filter. As you can see, the step name is blank, which means the workflow is completed and my status is still new account. We've now configured Extender to send emails, have some workflow user groups and colors, use those in a workflow template. We have attached that workflow to a Sage 300 GL view so that the workflow starts when a new GL record is inserted. The next step we're going to do to facilitate collaboration between users is configure the Information Manager tray so that the workflow icons can be seen from a Sage 300 screen. So this required two things. The first is in IM options on this screen, and I'll use the details view. It's a little bit easier. I'm going to choose Extender Workflow, and I want to attach that to my GL account screen. So I can go to GL accounts, and I can use the tray here and go to options. And I can see that the rotor ID is GL1100 and the field name is account. So if I go back to my Info Manager option setup, I can put in GL100 as the rotor ID, account as the field label, and I can select a workflow. Because this workflow is not started manually from a screen, it's started when the view operation happens, I don't need an entry step. And using parameters to set up values in the workflow is going to be covered in the advanced action section of this training video. So I'm going to save this, save. As with other Information Manager setup, I'm going to close this and I'm going to refresh the tray. If I now choose one of my GL accounts where the workflow has been used, I can see a little gray icon. Gray icon means there has been a workflow, there is a completed workflow. So I can look at the history in here, and I can see that this user actually created this new account, and I can double click to view more detail on the log. In this case, there's only been one step, so I'm seeing the same thing. The next example we're going to look at is how to add a condition in our workflow. So in our example of the GL account, we only want to make the row console red and send an email if it is a balance sheet account. To do this, we're going to use the evaluate action in the workflow. In my steps now, I'm going to, like here for example, I'm going to insert a new action. It's going to be 35, and it's going to be the evaluate action. So the evaluate is like a decision point in your flowchart, and we're evaluating based on the view fields that the workflow is attached to. So in this case, I'm going to look at the account type, and you can find the exact field names if you look at Extender View Info. I'm going to say if the account type is B for balance sheet. So if it is true, go to action 40, which is assign the color, etc. If it's not a balance sheet account, I'm going to go to step 70, which is completing the workflow. Let's save this. And as previously, when we insert a new action, we need to make sure that we're going to the right action. So here is going to 35, which is evaluate, and from there I'm going to assign color or complete depending on the account type. Let's now test this new workflow. So I'm going to add another balance sheet account, and this is going to be my New York office. And now I'm going to add an income statement account. Let's look at a console. As you can see, I've got 1003, which is in red. And I've received an email notification. And I've got my income statement account, which is not in red and not assigned to the manager account group. By extension, I could configure this to assign a different color to an income statement account or a different user group. I won't show you the detailed steps for that. That can be a little practice exercise to do after the video. In the next example, I want a workflow where the user who's assigned to that workflow actually needs to mark it as read, flag it in the console before the workflow is completed. To do this, I need to introduce some new steps. After my entry step is run, I need to go to a step when I'm waiting for the user to complete the workflow. And then that user can use the console to mark the workflow as read. We'll look at this in more detail now. We're going to add some steps and we're going to configure the actions relating to each of these steps. First, I'm going to add some steps. Insert a new row, and this is going to be a wait step. It's not an entry step. I'm going to insert one more row, and I'm going to call it mark as read. And this step done by the user on the console will complete the workflow. Next thing I need to do so that the user can use this step on the console is to configure my progress to steps. When my workflow is in the waiting step, I can go to the step called mark as read. And you will see what happens when we look at this on the console. And now we need to configure our entry step to use those new steps. At the moment, once I've sent my emails, I go to a step to complete the workflow. I'm now going to change this to go to step 75, and step 75 is going to go to another step. And then my step name is wait. And then once I've gone to that wait step, that's it. There's no true or false action. It's my last action for this branch of the workflow. Then finally, I need to configure the actions that relate to these new steps. Wait actions will do nothing because it'll be waiting for the user input. And mark as read is basically going to complete the workflow. Complete color. Then it's going to step 20, and step 20 is going to be to set a value. Now set a value, set some variables that are stored in the workflow, so they're useful for workflow history, and they can also be used in subsequent steps of the workflow. So here I'm going to create a new workflow value called comment, workflow comment, and I'm going to set the value as mark as read, marked as read. And then I'm going to go to my final step. No, I'm going to do one more step, which is set the status to complete. And I'm then going to go to my final step, which is complete the workflow. So let's save this and see it in action. Go back to our GL account and let's create a new GL account for our Toronto office. And if I look at my console, refresh it, you can see that this account has been created. You can see there is now a step name called wait on the console. So that means the workflow is not completed. And I can also see some new buttons are now enabled. The reassign button is enabled, so I can use that button and assign the workflow to another user. And I can also use my mark as read action, which was configured on the workflow as a progress to step. So just a reminder, we can double click on the template ID to open the workflow screen. So now if I look at the wait step, you can see that from the wait step, I can go to the mark as read. So this progress to translates on the console as a button you can click on the console. So now what we're going to do is log into Sage 300 as one of those manager users. So we will log as Anne and see how we can use the workflow console and the Sage screen icons to progress the workflow. So let's log into that Sage 300 company as Anne and look at our workflow console. I can see all the workflows that have been assigned to me or to a group I'm in. This one is one that's still waiting for approval. I can drill down and look at that account, make sure it's set up correctly. And then I can see an icon that indicates there's a pending workflow and that it is associated to a group that I'm in. So I can click here and I can actually, from this screen, progress the workflow and mark it as read or complete the workflow. And you can see it's now changed color. If I look at the step name, it's blank, means the workflow is complete and my status has been set to complete. From here, I can click on values and view the values, so the workflow comment has been set to marked as read. Logged in as Anne, I don't have access to the workflow inquiry, for example, to view the old workflows, so that's basically all I can see. I'm going to create a new configurator group in Extender called View Workflow. So the options around workflow are the ability to view all workflows or modify all workflows or configure the workflow. Configure the workflow is all the setup that we've been looking at so far. View the workflow logs is giving you the ability to view the history for the completed workflow. We'll look at that just now, logged in as Anne. And modify all workflow is the ability to progress any workflow, whether you're assigned to that workflow or not. So that would be an admin power user type of security role. And view all workflows could be you have the ability to see, so you can see who you're waiting on, records that you're waiting for approvals on, but you can't actually progress them yourselves. So let's add this security group. We're going to assign that user group to user Anne. Now if we log in as Anne, we can see we've got some new menus there, inquiries and reports. In inquiries, I can look at my summary log and I can see all the workflows that have been started. I can configure whether I sort newest record first or oldest record first. And I can also use Control F to filter. So for example, if I filter on record key 104, I can see that the new account was inserted at 2:30 and at 2:32 the notification was marked as read and the workflow was completed. I can also double click on this and it will show me the detailed steps for that workflow and who did them. And from here, I can then look at my values. To clear the filter, I go Control F, clear filter. Or I can go straight to the workflow detail log, which is the same one that we've looked at, filtered from the summary screen, and that includes all the steps for all the workflows that I have access to. So I can also print a report. You can upload your own report, so you can filter by workflow, step, date, etc. We don't have a lot of data, so we'll just print the whole report to have a quick look. And this shows me the different accounts that have been inserted, with who inserted and when. And for the final one, now that I have a multi-step workflow, I can see the history of the steps for that workflow. We've configured a workflow to start when a new GL account is inserted. We've configured it to do different things for a balance sheet account and for an income statement account, particularly sending an email and waiting for a user to confirm that they've seen the notification. The next thing we're going to do is use the workflow to update Sage 300 fields. So in this example, when the GL account is created, it will be made inactive, and we will then control the workflow to activate a GL account. So the focus of this part of the presentation is on using the set field action. So first thing we can do is renumber so that we have bigger gaps between the actions to play with. And we're going to say if it's true, let's go to action 41. And action 41 is going to be set field. Now, set field updates a value in a Sage 300 view. So this workflow is attached to the Sage GL account view. So we can use any field, we can update any field on the GL account view. So we're going to set the active flag to 0 to say that the account is inactive. The next action is going to be setting the status, making a comment in the workflow. So if that action returns false, that means the workflow has not been able to set the account to inactive. Maybe the user who's logged on doesn't have rights to the GL account. We should be going to sending a notification to a power user, or assigning the workflow to a power user, or going to a step that will deal with that critical error. So now we're going to create action 42, and the status is going to be new account inactive. And then if that's successful, we continue with our existing workflow, and we're therefore going to action 50. And here, once I've set the field, I actually want to go to action 44, which is setting the status. So let's renumber that. And now let's save this workflow and have a look at it in action. We can create petty cache 5, and it's for the Paris office. Go and have a look at our console. You can see 105 has been created. The status is inactive. The account is actually inactive. Now we can see the GL account has been made inactive, but in many cases I would want to show a message to the user confirming that the workflow has started and explaining why the record has been made inactive. Often when we use set field in the workflow, we want to also show a message when that view is used on a Sage 300 screen. So we are now going to modify our workflow to start interacting with the logged on user. First, for the workflow to send a message back to the user. And to do this, we're going to use the show message action. So here we've got our set field. So we can just insert a row like this and call this 55. And then we're going to show message. So we've got 3 types of messages that can be displayed to the user. Just a simple message, a warning, or an error. Let's do a message in this particular case, and then you can type the message that you want to display, and you can include fields from the view and from the workflow. Setting the field to inactive, if it is successful, I'm going to show a message, display a message. Just a note on this one. Typically, you only want to show the user message if the view is called on an actual Sage 300 screen. So if you have a custom program that's running in the background, you don't want any message. So let's save this and try. And that's for the Hong Kong office. And I'm seeing a message saying that the account has been made inactive. So we can now display a message back to the user. The flip side of that is to gather some input from the logged on user to use in the workflow. And we do this by adding two actions: add parameters and ask for parameters. So let's look at that on the mark as read complete action. On this one, once I've set the status, let's add a new action, add parameter. Let's call it account comment. This is going to be a free text field. If we're not sure what field types I can add, go to F1 help. The parameters that are required for my different actions. So add parameter, these are the different types I can have. A text with the size in bracket, or an integer or a number, or user to prompt for a user or user group, or a date field. Let's do text, and we're going to 60 character long. And there will be no default value. We're going to get a number, 35, and then 36. Create a new one, 37. We'll do two parameters. Add parameter. And this one is going to be the GL user, and it's going to be a type user. No default value again. And then when we have add parameter, once we've listed all the fields we want to add, we want the input form, we use the action called ask for parameters. What this does is stop the workflow and wait for the user to complete the fields. If they click OK and complete, then we'll go to our next step, which is complete the workflow. If they click cancel on that screen, then the workflow is not really completed. I want to go back to the wait step. So we're going to go to an action, so I'm going to call 50. The user completes the parameters, complete the workflow. If not, go back to step wait. So this one is going to be go to step. Step name is wait. Let's check what we've done. Actually, this one should be 37. Number and check what we've got. We go to 40, which is assigning the color, the value, and the status related to complete. And if it's not successful, we go back to step wait. Let's save this and try it in action. So I'm going to create the workflow logged in as admin. And now I'm going to add a new account for the Pettycash Nairobi office. Let's log in as Anne. Look at our workflow console. Let's start with this one. We've just created the 1009. If I click mark as read, I'll be prompted to put in a comment. And I can allocate this workflow to a user. Let's pick up Dan. And you can see now the workflow is complete. If I click on values, I can see my comment has been updated, my GL user parameter has been updated. These are all now values as part of the workflow that will show on the workflow history and on the workflow report. So this workflow history is accessible from the console for pending and completed workflow, and is also accessible for all completed workflow in the inquiry screen. So this is why we would generally suggest that once the workflow is completed, when you finish testing your workflow, you actually amend your workflow template if you're authorized to do it. So we will log back in as admin to configure our workflow. So for testing, it's quite useful to set auto delete to no, but for real live workflow, in most cases, you will set auto delete to yes. So when the workflow is completed, the row will be deleted from the console. You will have access to all the history in the workflow history inquiry. We've looked in detail at how to create step by step a workflow when a GL account is inserted. Firstly, we've populated some workflow-related fields, configured it to alert certain users when that workflow is started. We've then added some controlled the flow of the information within that workflow so that we have a different workflow if it's a balance sheet account versus an income statement account. We have then configured it to have multiple steps, including a manual step where a user needs to confirm that they've seen the alert before the workflow is completed. An extension of that would be to approve the account, approve the record, approve the batch. We have then seen how to set a field on a Sage 300 view in the workflow. In our example, we're making the account inactive. And then we're informing the user, we're sending a message back to the user with the fact that the workflow has started. And we've also configured the workflow to gather some input when the user completes the workflow. So this has let us cover most of the actions in Extender Workflow Configurator. To complete the business use of this workflow, you would also need to have a way to approve and activate this GL account. And there's two ways to do that. One way is to include an approve step in our existing workflow. Another way is to have a workflow on the active flag to activate the workflow, a separate workflow. There are a few other actions in Configurator that we have classified under advanced workflow actions, which will be covered separately. One is using parameters in the workflow. One is using the if workflow exists, is insert, is update, is delete in the workflow. And there are some examples in the online documentation with how to use these workflows. And also in the video on AR on hold, customer on hold workflow, and the AP batch approval workflow. To get started, we suggest you download and install the latest update for Extender and Information Manager. Document your business process and then map that process to the workflow steps and actions. You can then review the sample workflow templates and amend them to fit your business process. And then at that point, you'll be able to identify if any custom actions are required. If any custom actions are required, then you will need to use Extender Customizer or Developer Edition. And we have Extender Workflow Online Help that is available at this link, help.orchid.systems. There will be tutorials and examples, new examples released regularly. We're also publishing some videos on the website on some specific workflow examples, such as AR Customer on Hold and AP Batch Approval Workflow. And we also keep maintaining the knowledge base with specific topics relating to Extender and Extender Workflow. Thank you for your time.